A boarding pass is a promise, a simple piece of paper that says you belong. But for one woman at JFK, that promise was about to be torn in half, literally. She was just another passenger in a grey hoodie, exhausted and wanting to go home. The pilot, a man draped in authority and arrogance, saw her differently. He held her fate and her ID in his hands. In one shocking act of contempt, he would rip her identity to shreds, believing he was untouchable. He had no idea he wasn't just grounding a passenger. He was interfering with a federal investigation and about to unleash a storm of karma so severe it would cost him everything. This isn't just a story about a confrontation. It's a lesson etched in humiliation, a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one you should fear the most. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar, chaotic symphony. The low hum of thousands of conversations, the percussive roll of suitcases over tiled floors, and the disembodied melodic chimes announcing boarding changes. It was a place of transitions of hellos and goodbyes, and for Dr. Maya Jenkins, it was the final hurdle after a grueling 72-hour stretch that had blurred New York City's boroughs into one long, sleepless investigation. She was dressed for anonymity, not for respect. A simple soft grey hoodie was pulled up over her head, earbuds nestled in her ears, playing a low, calming classical mix, a small barrier against the world. Faded jeans and comfortable sneakers completed the ensemble of someone who valued comfort over presentation. At 29, her face, usually bright and analytical, was etched with fatigue. She clutched a worn leather backpack to her chest, containing not much more than a laptop, a change of clothes, and the crushing weight of her recent work. All she wanted was to get on Trans-American Flight 217 to San Francisco, sink into her window seat in coach, and let the gentle drone of the engines lull her into a much-needed oblivion. The boarding call for Group 3 crackled through the speakers. Maya pulled out one earbud, shuffled forward with the rest of the herd, and readied her digital boarding pass and driver's license. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, offered a tired but genuine smile, scanning Maya's phone without issue. "Have a good flight, ma'am." Maya nodded gratefully and moved down the jet bridge. But as she reached the aircraft door, a figure blocked the entrance, creating a bottleneck. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his crisp white pilot's uniform immaculately pressed. Silver wings were pinned above his breast pocket, and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets declared his rank captain. His name tag read R. Henderson. He had a square jaw, steel-grey hair cut in a severe military style, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He was scanning each passenger with an air of proprietary scrutiny, as if he were personally vetting them for entry into his private club. When Maya reached him, he held up a hand, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "Boarding pass and ID, please." His voice was a low baritone, laced with an authority that brooked no argument. It was an unusual request. The gate agent had already checked her documents. The flight attendant standing just inside the galley, a young woman named Sarah, shifted uncomfortably. "The gate agent just checked it," Maya said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. She held up her phone and her California driver's license. Captain Robert Henderson didn't look at her phone. His eyes were fixed on the plastic card in her hand. He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers with a dismissive coldness. He held it close to his face, squinting. The photo on the ID was a few years old, taken on a day her hair was styled differently, but it was clearly her. "Dr. Maya Jenkins," he read aloud, his lips curling into a faint, condescending smirk. "Doctor of what philosophy?" Maya's internal alarms, honed by years of training at Quantico, began to hum. This wasn't a standard security check. This was a power play. "It's just a name, Captain," she replied, keeping her tone even. May I have my ID back, please? I'm holding up the line." He ignored her request. He turned the ID over and over, angling it under the harsh fluorescent light of the jet bridge. "This looks off," he declared, his voice loud enough for the passengers behind her to hear. "The lamination is peeling at the corner. Could be a fake." It wasn't peeling. There was a minuscule nick on the edge from being dropped, once a flaw so tiny it was barely visible. Maya could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. The judgment, the suspicion. She was just a young black woman in a hoodie, and this man in a uniform was painting her as a potential threat. "Captain, I can assure you it is a valid government-issued ID." Maya stated, her voice dropping, a register becoming firmer. "I've used it to get through TSA no more than an hour ago. Now please return my property." The challenge in her voice seemed to ignite something in him. His eyes narrowed. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the pushback that in his mind justified his actions. "I am the captain of this aircraft," he boomed, his voice echoing in the confined space. "My word is law here. I am responsible for the safety of every single person on this plane, and I do not feel safe with this document, or with your attitude." The flight attendant, Sarah, took a half-step forward. "Captain, perhaps we could just re-verify with the gate." "Stay out of this, Sarah," he snapped without looking at her. He turned his cold gaze back to Maya. He held the ID between his thumb and forefinger, a piece of plastic that contained her identity, her credibility, her right to exist in this space. And then, with a deliberate, theatrical slowness, he did the unthinkable. He brought his other hand up, and with a sharp, violent twist, tore the driver's license in two. The cracking sound of the plastic was like a gunshot in the tense silence of the jet bridge. The two halves of her face, of her name, fell from his fingers and clattered onto the grated floor. A collective gasp went through the line. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The two pieces of her life lay at her feet, a declaration of her powerlessness at the hands of this man. Captain Henderson looked down at the destroyed ID, then back at Maya, a triumphant, ugly sneer on his face. "Fake IDs aren't welcome on my flight," he said, his voice dripping with finality. "You're denied boarding. Get off my jet bridge." He then turned his back on her, gesturing for the next passenger to move forward, as if he had just swatted a fly. He believed he had won. He believed the matter was closed. He had no idea he had just ended his own career. For a long second, Maya simply stared at the two pieces of her driver's license on the floor. The world seemed to slow down. She could hear the frantic beating of her own heart, a drum against the backdrop of stunned silence. Her training kicked in, a cool wave washing over the hot surge of anger and humiliation. Assess. Don't react. Control the situation. The first rule of any engagement was to control herself. Captain Henderson had already dismissed her, turning to the next passenger, a bewildered-looking man in a business suit. "Let's keep it moving, folks," Henderson commanded, his voice artificially cheerful. But Maya didn't move. She didn't retreat. She simply stood her ground, her posture shifting from weary traveler to something else, entirely. Her shoulders squared, her head lifted. The fatigue in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, crystalline focus that was far more intimidating than any outward display of anger. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "Captain Robert Henderson," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the murmurs of the crowd with the precision of a scalpel. It wasn't a plea. It was a summons. Henderson paused, annoyed. He turned back his face, a mask of irritation. "I thought I told you to leave. Are you deaf? Do I need to call security?" "That won't be necessary," Maya replied, her voice remaining unnervingly calm. "But you will need to pick up my government-issued identification from the floor, and then you're going to listen to me very carefully." A few passengers snickered, thinking it was a gutsy but foolish move. Henderson's face flushed with rage. "You are in no position to give me orders. You are a civilian who has been denied boarding. Now for the last time." "Wrong." Maya interrupted the single word, sharp and absolute. She slowly unzipped the front pocket of her grey hoodie. The sound of the zipper was unnaturally loud in the jet bridge. She reached inside her backpack, which she was still clutching, and her hand emerged not with a wallet or a phone, but with a small, black leather case. She flipped it open with a practiced flick of her wrist. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn leather, was a gleaming gold federal badge. Below it, her credentials clear and official: Special Agent Maya Jenkins, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She held it up for him to see the metal catching the light. "Special Agent Maya Jenkins, FBI." She stated, her voice now ringing with an authority that dwarfed his. "And you, Captain Henderson, have just committed a federal offense. 2, in fact." The captain's arrogant smirk dissolved. His face went slack, the color draining from it, as if a plug had been pulled. His eyes darted from the badge to her face, then back to the badge. Disbelief, then confusion, then the cold, creeping tendrils of pure terror began to dawn in his expression. The pilot, who had been a god in this metal tube just seconds before, now looked like a schoolboy caught in a lie. That's not possible," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. You're in a hoodie." Maya's lips pressed into a thin, unimpressed line. "My apologies. I didn't realize federal agents were required to adhere to a specific dress code while traveling for an active investigation. Now, as I was saying, first, you willfully destroyed government property, which that ID issued by the state of California represents. Second, and far more seriously, you have knowingly interfered with a federal agent in the performance of her official duties." She took a step closer, her gaze pinning him in place. The passengers behind her were no longer just watching. They were filming their phones, raised, capturing the spectacular implosion of Captain Henderson's career. "I am on this flight not as a tourist, but on official, time-sensitive bureau business." Maya continued, her voice low and menacing. "Business that is critical to national security. By denying me boarding and destroying my identification, you have not just inconvenienced a passenger. You have jeopardized a federal operation." She gestured with her head toward the 2 pieces of plastic on the floor. "Pick it up." The command was not a request. Henderson, his hands trembling, slightly bent down stiffly. His proud ramrod posture was gone, replaced by the humiliating crouch of a man forced to retrieve the evidence of his own stupidity. He fumbled with the pieces, his fingers suddenly clumsy. When he straightened up, he held the 2 halves of her ID in his palm, like a grim offering. His face was pale and slick with sweat. "Agent, I apologize," he stuttered. "It was a misunderstanding. The ID, it looked suspicious. It looked suspicious to you because you looked at me and saw a threat, not a passenger." Maya countered, her voice cold as ice. "You saw a young black woman who didn't fit your preconceived notion of who belongs in first class or who carries a doctorate. You didn't see a citizen. You didn't see a fellow professional. And you certainly didn't see the person who could dismantle your entire life before this plane even pushes back from the gate. You saw what you wanted to see, Captain, and now everyone sees you for what you are." She took the broken pieces of her ID from his shaking hand. She then looked past him to the horrified flight attendant, Sarah. "I will be boarding this flight. You will instruct the cabin crew to treat me as any other passenger. And your captain," she said, her eyes snapping back to Henderson, Will not be flying this plane, not today, not ever again if I have anything to say about it. She then pulled out her phone, no longer a device for a boarding pass, but a tool of her trade. She navigated to a secure contact and hit call. "This is Agent Jenkins," she said into the phone, her voice all business. "I have a situation at JFK Gate B34. I need to speak with Agent Coulson immediately. We have a problem. Code interference." Captain Robert Henderson stood there utterly broken, the 4 golden stripes on his shoulders, suddenly looking like a cheap, tawdry costume. The king had been dethroned in his own castle, and his reign had ended with the crack of a single piece of plastic. The 10 minutes that followed were a masterclass in controlled chaos. As Maya stood on the jet bridge, speaking quietly but firmly into her phone, the world rearranged itself around her. Passengers, sensing the gravity of the situation, backed away, giving her a wide berth. The bewildered businessman who had been next in line now looked at Maya with a mixture of awe and fear. The flight attendant, Sarah, her face ashen, began speaking urgently into the cabin intercom to the other crew members. "Coulson," Maya said, her superior's voice now patched through. "It's Jenkins. I've had an incident at the gate for Flight 217. The pilot, a Captain Robert Henderson, just destroyed my state-issued ID and attempted to deny me boarding." On the other end of the line, Special Agent in Charge. Mark Coulson was silent for a moment. Coulson was a man who rarely showed emotion, but Maya could practically hear the gears turning in his sharp, tactical mind. "Interference?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Active or passive?" "Active, hostile, and in full view of about 50 witnesses," Maya confirmed. "He's grounded, Mark. I've informed him he won't be flying this plane." "Damn right he won't," Coulson's voice crackled back. "Stand by, Jenkins. I'm dispatching a Port Authority unit to your location to detain him for questioning. I'm also calling Amelia Vance at Trans-American's Corporate Security. She owes me a favor. This is going to be handled, and it's going to be handled now." He paused. "But more importantly, what about our asset? Is the package still on board?" Maya's eyes scanned the interior of the plane, visible past the galley. "Affirmative. I caught a glimpse of him taking his seat before the commotion started. Seat 14B. Julian Croft." Julian Croft. The package. Publicly, he was a mid-level software architect for a boutique tech firm. Privately, the FBI knew him as the Ghost, a brilliant and elusive cyber-terrorist responsible for a string of sophisticated attacks on the nation's financial infrastructure. He had siphoned millions, destabilized markets, and had always been, as his moniker suggested, a ghost. But they had finally gotten a solid lead. Croft was spooked, and he was running. He had booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco, where he had a new identity and a private plane waiting to take him to a non-extradition country in Asia. This flight was their only chance to apprehend him on U.S. soil quietly and without incident. "You have to get on that plane." "Maya," Coulson said, his tone urgent. "The takedown is set for SFO. We can't risk him getting spooked and deplaning in New York. The fallout would be catastrophic." "I know," Maya said. "That's why Henderson's timing couldn't have been worse. He almost blew the entire operation over a piece of plastic." Just then, 2 Port Authority officers arrived, their faces grim and professional. They were followed by a flustered-looking airline official in a suit clearly summoned from a nearby office. Maya gave them a curt nod, pointing toward the now catatonic Captain Henderson. "He's the one," she said simply. The officers approached Henderson, who didn't even seem to register their presence until they were flanking him. "Captain Henderson," one of the officers said, "we need you to come with us." That was the final nail in the coffin. The sight of law enforcement formally escorting him away seemed to finally break through his shock. His face crumpled. "This is a mistake," he pleaded, looking at the airline official. "Tell them I was following protocol." But the airline official wouldn't meet his eyes. He knew a career-ending disaster when he saw one. Henderson was led away his proud stride, reduced to a defeated shuffle down the jet bridge past the very people he had lorded over just minutes before. With the immediate threat neutralized, the focus shifted back to the mission. The airline official, a man named David, approached Maya, wringing his hands. "Agent Jenkins on behalf of Trans-American Airlines. I am so sorry. We have a reserve pilot on standby at the airport, but it will cause a significant delay." "There will be no delay," Maya stated flatly. "You have a first officer and a second officer on board who are perfectly qualified to handle this flight. You will clear it with your operations center immediately. This plane departs on schedule. Am I understood?" David blinked, taken aback by her command. "Yes, Agent. Of course. Right away." He scurried off, phone pressed to his ear. Maya turned to Sarah, the flight attendant, who was watching her with wide, stunned eyes. "What's your name?" Maya asked, her tone softening slightly. "Sarah, ma'am. Agent." "Sarah," Maya said, giving her a small, reassuring nod. "I need you to do your job exactly as you normally would. I am just another passenger. I will be in seat 28A. Do not draw any attention to me. Do not speak of what happened. Your professionalism is now a matter of national security. Can you do that?" Sarah, seemingly grateful to have a clear directive in the midst of the chaos, straightened up. "Yes, Agent. Absolutely." Finally, the path was clear. Maya stepped onto the plane. She walked down the aisle, the whispers of the passengers following her like a wave. She ignored them, her focus entirely on her objective. As she passed row 14, she didn't turn her head, but her peripheral vision captured him. Julian Croft. He was slight, with mousy brown hair and thick glasses. He was tapping nervously at his phone, completely oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be, a harmless tech nerd. Maya settled into her seat, 28A, a window seat towards the back. The door closed. The pre-flight announcements began, delivered by a shaken but professional-sounding first officer who was now in command. The plane pushed back from the gate, right on schedule. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Maya leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, finally allowing herself a moment to process. Henderson's bigotry had nearly cost them everything. It was a stark reminder of how the most complex, high-stakes operations could be derailed by the simplest, ugliest of human flaws. But the crisis had also revealed an unexpected wrinkle. As the plane began its powerful takeoff roll, hurtling down the runway, Maya's phone buzzed with a secure text from Coulson. "Jenkins, we pulled Henderson's file. He's clean. Too clean. But we cross-referenced his financials. There's a problem. A recent anomalous deposit was made to his offshore account 2 days ago. $50,000. The source is a shell corporation we've linked to Croft's network." Maya's blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, the words blurring as the G-force pressed her into her seat. It wasn't a random act of prejudice. It wasn't just a pilot with a god complex. Captain Henderson had been paid to stop her from getting on this flight. He wasn't just an obstacle. He was a mole. And he knew an FBI agent was coming for Julian Croft. The real question was how the revelation hit Maya with the force of a physical blow. The world inside the pressurized cabin of Flight 217 suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous. The droning engines, meant to be a soothing blanket of white noise, now sounded like a countdown timer. Henderson wasn't just a bigot. He was a bought and paid-for accomplice. This changed everything. The confrontation at the gate wasn't an unfortunate incident. It was a deliberately engineered stopgap. Croft or someone in his network knew law enforcement was closing in. They knew an agent would be on this flight. Tearing up her ID wasn't just an act of spite. It was a calculated, albeit clumsy, attempt to sever her from the mission. Maya's mind raced her forensic psychology training, kicking in, reframing the entire event. Henderson's over-the-top performance, his theatricality. It wasn't just arrogance. It was the desperate act of a man trying to earn his payday. He needed a plausible reason to deny her boarding, and he'd chosen the oldest, ugliest tool in the book, prejudice. He assumed she'd either back down or cause a scene that would get her arrested, achieving the same result. He never counted on the badge. A new chilling thought emerged. If Croft's network knew an agent was coming, did they know which agent? Did they have her description? Did Croft himself know who she was? She had to assume, yes. Her anonymity was gone. She was no longer a hunter, observing her prey from the shadows. She was a known entity, locked in a metal tube, with a man who was far more dangerous than his nebbish appearance suggested. Her phone buzzed again. It was Coulson. Jenkins' protocol is changed. This is no longer a covert surveillance op. Croft is live. He may be armed. He may have a contingency plan. The takedown at SFO is still a go, but the risk profile is now critical. Do not engage him on the flight unless absolutely necessary. Your primary role is to ensure he doesn't have an exit strategy before we land. No exit strategy. On an airplane, there were only a few nightmarish possibilities that phrase could imply. Maya's gaze subtly shifted, scanning the cabin. She profiled the passengers around her, looking for anyone who seemed out of place, anyone who might be Croft's accomplice, a burly man in row 20, who hadn't taken his eyes off his laptop, a woman across the aisle who seemed a little too interested in the cabin crew's movements. Every mundane detail was now potentially sinister. She needed an ally on the inside, someone with eyes and ears throughout the cabin. She discreetly pressed the call button above her head. A few moments later, Sarah appeared, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying her anxiety. "Yes, Mom," she whispered. "I need a glass of water, Sarah." Maya said, her voice low. "And I need you to listen. Don't react. The man in seat 14B, Julian Croft. Have you or any of the other crew members noticed anything unusual about him? Any odd requests? Any interactions with other passengers?" Sarah's professionalism was admirable. She nodded as if receiving a simple drink order. "I'll be right back with that water," she said. When she returned, she leaned in, close, ostensibly to hand Maya the cup. "He hasn't left his seat," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "He refused a drink. Said he wanted to sleep. But his eyes are open. He's been watching the forward galley, and there was something else. During boarding, he put his carry-on in the overhead bin for row 12, not his own. Bingo. A small detail, but a significant one. It suggested a potential dead drop or a desire to distance himself from the bag's contents. "Thank you, Sarah," Maya said, taking the water. "One more thing. You and your crew are to perform your duties as normal, but I want you to be hyper-aware of that forward section of the cabin. Report anything, and I mean anything that seems out of place. A passenger going to the lavatory too often, a coded conversation, anything. Use the call button if you see something. 2 short presses." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and resolve. "You can count on us, Agent." For the next 4 hours, the flight became a high-stakes chess match, played in silence. Maya pretended to doze her head against the window, but she was acutely aware of every sound, every movement. She watched Croft through the reflection in the window, observing his micro-expressions. He was a coiled spring of nervous energy, his leg bouncing his fingers, constantly drumming on the armrest. He wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. Halfway through the flight, her call button chimed. 2 short presses. Maya was instantly alert. She looked up to see Sarah moving down the aisle with the drinks cart, her movements smooth and practiced. As she passed Maya's row, she spoke without looking at her. Lavatory. Forward. Man from 12C just went in. Been in there 10 minutes. 12C. The same row where Croft had stowed his bag. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. 10 minutes was too long. Long enough to change clothes, assemble a weapon, or access a device. She had to move. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood stretching, as if she were just stiff from the long flight. She made her way forward, her gait casual. As she approached the forward galley, the man from 12C exited the lavatory. He was tall with a severe face and the unmistakable build of a former military man. He didn't look at Maya, but their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, but there was a cold, hard glint of purpose in his gaze. He returned to his seat without a word. This was Croft's accomplice, his muscle, his contingency plan. Maya entered the lavatory. It was empty, but the air smelled faintly of bleach and something else, an acrid chemical smell. She ran her trained eyes over every surface. In the small trash receptacle, tucked beneath a pile of used paper towels, was a small discarded SIM card tray from a burner phone. He had swapped his communications. He was now talking to someone new. She returned to her seat, her mind racing. The accomplice in 12C, the stowed bag, the swapped SIM. Croft wasn't just running, he was coordinating. But for what the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding, the first officer's voice came over the PA. Folks, we're beginning our initial descent into San Francisco. Please return to your seats and make sure your seatbelts are fastened. This was it. The end game was approaching. Whatever Croft and his accomplice had planned, it would happen now before they were on the ground and in the custody of Coulson's waiting tactical team. Maya looked out the window at the sprawling lights of the Bay Area, appearing through the clouds. The plane was a locked room, hurtling towards a resolution one way or another. Her hand instinctively went to her side, where concealed beneath her hoodie, her service weapon felt cold, heavy and reassuring. The pressure cooker was about to blow. The descent into San Francisco International Airport was a symphony of controlled mechanics. The whirring of the flaps, the gentle shifts in pressure, the changing pitch of the engines. For most passengers, it was the mundane end of a long journey. For Maya, every sound, every jolt was a potential trigger for chaos. Her eyes were fixed on the reflection in the window, which gave her a distorted but clear view of the cabin's forward section. Julian Croft, the ghost, was no longer fidgeting. He was unnaturally still, his hands resting on his lap. It was the calm of a man who had made his decision. The accomplice in 12C was equally still, a statue of coiled tension. Maya sent a final encrypted text to Coulson Asset has accomplice seat, 12C. Both alive. Expect a move on final approach or taxi. I will not engage unless forced. Your team needs to be ready for anything the second that door opens. Coulson's reply was instant. Acknowledged. SFO TAC team is on alert. We're ready. Just keep the lid on it, Jenkins. Keeping the lid on it. That was the challenge. The plane banked steeply, lining up with the runway. The city lights grew brighter closer. The accomplice in 12C subtly shifted his weight, his hand dipping inside his jacket. Maya's body tensed. This was it. But he didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he simply rested his hand there. It was a signal, a silent communication to Croft. The landing gear deployed with a heavy, reassuring thud. The plane skimmed over the dark waters of the bay, the runway lights rushing up to meet them. Maya's training focused her mind into a single point of concentration. Watch his hands. Watch his eyes. Predict his move. The wheels touched the tarmac with a squeal of rubber and a jolt that ran through the fuselage. The engines roared into reverse thrust, pressing everyone back into their seats. The plane was decelerating rapidly, but for Maya, time was stretching out. She watched Croft. His eyes weren't on the window or the seat in front of him. They were locked on the exit sign over the forward door. He wasn't going to fight. He was going to run. As the plane turned off the main runway and began its slow taxi toward the terminal, the familiar ding of the seatbelt sign being extinguished sounded. In that instant, before the first officer could even begin his welcome announcement, the plan exploded into motion. The accomplice in 12C was on his feet. "Medical emergency!" He yelled, his voice a powerful roar that commanded attention. "My friend is having a seizure." He pointed at Croft, who immediately began to convulse violently in his seat, his limbs flailing, his head thrashing against the headrest. It was a dramatic, terrifyingly convincing performance. Passengers gasped. Sarah and another flight attendant rushed forward. "Stay back, give him space." The accomplice ordered, positioning himself to block the aisle. Maya saw the gambit instantly. It was brilliant in its simplicity. They were creating a diversion, a zone of chaos and panic around Croft. In the ensuing confusion, with medical personnel being called and the crew distracted, they would try to get him off the plane first, away from the waiting FBI team, who would be focused on deplaning passengers. Maya was already moving. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She flowed down the aisle, her movements economical and precise. She bypassed the panicked passengers, her eyes locked on the scene. "I'm a doctor," Maya announced, her voice calm but authoritative, cutting through the noise. It wasn't even a lie. Her doctorate in psychology gave the statement a veneer of truth. "Let me through." The accomplice turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw her. He hadn't expected interference, especially not from the woman in the hoodie from the back of the plane. He moved to block her. "He needs a paramedic, not a psychologist," he snarled, revealing his knowledge of who she was in a fatal slip of the tongue. "And you need to get out of my way," Maya said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. She didn't stop moving. In one fluid motion, she sidestepped him, brought her arm up to knock his blocking arm aside, and slipped past him. She was now standing over the seizing Julian Croft. His eyes were rolling back in his head, foam likely from a hidden packet of crushed antacids flecking his lips. It was a good show, but Maya wasn't watching his face. She was watching his right hand, which was unbuckling his seatbelt under the cover of his convulsions. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice low, and for his ears only. "The show is over." Croft's eyes snapped open. The seizure stopped instantly. The look on his face was one of pure shock, followed by a surge of feral hatred. He lunged, not at her, but toward the aisle, trying to scramble past her. He never made it. Maya was faster. She pivoted, using his own momentum against him. Her hand clamped down on his shoulder, and with a technique that was pure Quantico, she forced him back down into his seat with a sickening thud. At the same time, she drew her Sig Sauer P229 from its concealed holster. She didn't point it at him, but held it low and ready, the very picture of deadly competence. "FBI, nobody move," she shouted, her voice now a commanding roar that filled the entire cabin. The accomplice, seeing the plan had failed, made his own move. He reached inside his jacket, but before he could draw his weapon, two passengers who had been seated behind him, a man reading a newspaper and a woman knitting, were on their feet. They moved with a speed and efficiency that was anything but civilian. They were Agent Coulson's undercover TAC team members, planted on the flight as a final contingency. They subdued the accomplice, slamming him against the bulkhead and cuffing him before he could even process what was happening. The cabin door opened. Standing there, framed by the light of the terminal, was Agent Mark Coulson and a team of heavily armed FBI agents in tactical gear. "Agent Jenkins," Coulson said with a grim nod. "Report." Maya kept her focus on the now cowering Julian Croft. "Asset and one accomplice in custody," she said, her breathing steady, her voice unshaken. "The cabin is secure. Julian Croft, the ghost, the brilliant cyber-terrorist who had outsmarted governments and corporations, just stared at her. He had been undone not by a SWAT team or a car chase, but by the quiet, observant woman in the grey hoodie, the one his hired muscle captain Henderson was supposed to have stopped at the door. The mission was over. The takedown was a success. But for Maya, the day's work wasn't finished. Now it was time for the karma. While Maya was securing Julian Croft, the gears of justice for Captain Robert Henderson were already grinding into motion. The moment he was escorted off the jet bridge at JFK, he was no longer a respected airline captain. He was a suspect in a federal investigation. He was taken to a sterile, windowless interrogation room at the Port Authority police station inside the airport. The arrogance he had worn like a second uniform was gone, replaced by a pallid, sweaty fear. He sat there for 2 hours, the silence amplifying his anxiety. He tried to build his defense in his head. The ID looked fake. He was following security protocols. It was his right, his duty as captain. He repeated the flimsy excuses to himself until he almost believed them. Then the door opened and Agent Mark Coulson walked in. He didn't wear a tactical vest, just a simple, well-tailored suit. He placed a thin manila folder on the metal table between them, but didn't open it. He just sat down and stared at Henderson, his expression unreadable. "Robert Henderson." Coulson began his voice, calm and even. "You've had a 25-year career with Trans-American. Before that, 10 years in the Air Force. Decorated pilot, flawless record, a pension worth over $2 million waiting for you, a beautiful house in Greenwich, Connecticut. You had it all, Bob. Why throw it all away?" Henderson licked his dry lips. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was doing my job. That woman's ID was suspect. I made a judgment call." Coulson sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. "A judgment call. Is that what you call it?" "Let's talk about judgment calls, Bob. Was it a judgment call to accept a $50,000 wire transfer from a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands? A corporation we happen to know is a money laundering front for a cyber criminal named Julian Croft." Henderson's carefully constructed composure shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking grey and old. I have no idea what you're talking about." Coulson finally opened the folder. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a bank statement, a transaction record. The date, the amount, the source, it was all there in black and white. "This is a copy of the wire transfer to your offshore account in Zurich," Coulson said flatly. "We know about the account, Bob. We know about the gambling debts you've been racking up in Atlantic City. We know you were desperate. Croft's people found you, and they made you an offer. Stop the agent getting on Flight 212 at Hoon. They gave you a description, a young African-American woman traveling alone, likely in casual attire. They told you to use any means necessary. So you chose bigotry as your weapon. You saw Agent Jenkins and you saw an easy target. You thought you could provoke her, humiliate her, and get her thrown off the flight, and no one would question the great Captain Henderson." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Henderson's reality. He slumped in his chair, the fight completely gone out of him. You failed, Bob. Coulson continued, his voice turning hard. You failed to stop her. And in doing so, you've destroyed your life. Let me paint you a picture of what happens next. Coulson leaned forward. First, Transamerican has already suspended you without pay, pending termination. Your photo and the videos the passengers took are all over the news. The airline's VP of Operations. Amelia Vance is personally overseeing the investigation. She's a friend of mine. She told me to tell you that the company is pursuing every legal avenue to claw back your pension due to gross misconduct and criminal activity. Second, the FAA is being notified as we speak. They take a very dim view of pilots who conspire with criminals. Your commercial pilot's license, consider it revoked. For life. You will never legally sit in the cockpit of a 747 again. You'll be lucky if you can get a license to fly a kite. Third, and this is where I come in. Coulson said, his eyes turning to flint, you are being charged with multiple federal felonies, destruction of government property, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to aid and abet a fugitive. You weren't just being a jerk, Bob. You were an active participant in a criminal enterprise. You jeopardized a national security operation and put my agent's life at risk. We're going to ask for the maximum sentence. With your Air Force background, the judge is going to see this as a particularly vile betrayal. Henderson was openly weeping now, fat, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. I didn't know, he choked out. They just said, stop a woman from getting on a plane. They said she was a corporate spy. I didn't know it was the FBI. It doesn't matter who you thought she was. Coulson snapped, his voice rising for the first time. You took money to abuse your authority and target a citizen. The fact that she was one of my best agents is just the icing on a very ugly cake. Coulson stood up, a look of profound disgust on his face. You had respect, a great career, a legacy, and you traded it all for 50 grand to pay off a poker debt. You tore up a young woman's ID because you thought she was powerless. But the only thing you managed to tear up was your own life. Enjoy prison, Bob. Coulson walked out, leaving Robert Henderson alone in the room with the ruins of his world. The hard karma had hit back, not like a sudden lightning strike, but like a slow, methodical and complete demolition. He lost his job, his license, his pension, his reputation and his freedom, all because of a single hateful act born of arrogance and greed. The man who saw himself as a god of the skies was about to become just another number in the federal prison system. 3 months later, the autumn chill had begun to settle over Washington, D.C. In a quiet, sunlit corner office at the J. Edgar Hoover building, Maya Jenkins stood looking out at the city. She was no longer in a hoodie, but in a crisp navy blue suit, her posture radiating a quiet confidence. On the wall behind the large oak desk was a framed letter of commendation from the director of the FBI, citing her exemplary conduct and clear-headed professionalism under extreme pressure during the apprehension of Julian Croft. Agent Mark Coulson sat behind the desk, swirling coffee in a ceramic mug. He took the plea deal, Coulson said, breaking the silence. Henderson, 20 years. He'll be out in 12 with good behavior. He testified against the rest of Croft's network. Gave us everything. The man who hired him, the money trail. Everything. He sang like a canary to save himself a decade. Maya nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. And Croft. Facing a century's worth of charges, he'll never see the outside of a supermax prison again, Coulson said. All thanks to you, Maya. You kept the lid on it. You handled an impossible situation with grace. It shouldn't have been an impossible situation, Maya mused, turning from the window. It should have been a routine boarding. He didn't just see a threat in me, Mark. He saw someone he thought he could get away with bullying. It was a crime of opportunity fueled by prejudice. and he paid the price, Coulson affirmed. A steep one. The incident had sent shockwaves through the airline industry. Trans-American Airlines, under the fierce guidance of Amelia Vance, had launched a massive internal overhaul. They fired Henderson and several other employees who had a history of passenger complaints that had been previously ignored. They instituted a mandatory top-to-bottom, implicit bias and de-escalation training program for all crew members from pilots to baggage handlers. The case of Captain Henderson became a cautionary tale, a legend whispered in break rooms and training facilities the day a pilot tore up the wrong ID and his life with it. Sarah, the flight attendant who had kept her cool and assisted Maya, had been promoted to cabin lead. In her witness statement, she had been unflinchingly honest about Henderson's aggression and Maya's professionalism, and the airline had rewarded her integrity. For Maya, the commendation was gratifying, but the incident had left a subtle scar. It was a reminder that no matter how high she climbed, how many degrees she earned, or what authority her badge held, there would always be people who would see only the color of her skin or her gender. But it also reinforced a deeper truth. Her greatest strength wasn't her badge or her weapon, but the calm, analytical mind that her life experiences had forged. Henderson had tried to take her power, but had only succeeded in revealing the depths of her resilience. "Are you okay, Maya?" Coulson asked, his gaze softening with genuine concern. She gave him a small, wry smile. "I'm fine, Mark." In a way, he did me a favor. He reminded me why I do this job, to stand up for the people who don't have a badge to flash, to be the one who ensures that power isn't just for the people who wear a uniform. She picked up her briefcase, ready for her next assignment. The ghost of Captain Henderson's sneer was a faint memory, eclipsed by the satisfaction of a job well done and justice thoroughly served. He had tried to ground her, to tear her down, but she had risen above it. He was a cautionary tale, a man confined by the walls of a prison and his own bitterness. She was an FBI agent with her eyes on the horizon, ready for the next challenge, her spirit unlike her ID, unbroken and whole. He had lost everything because he couldn't see past his own prejudice while she continued to fly, not just in the sky, but in a career dedicated to protecting the very principles he had so arrogantly trampled. The story of Special Agent Maya Jenkins and Captain Robert Henderson is a powerful testament to the fact that true authority isn't found in a uniform or a title, but in character and integrity. Henderson believed his 4 stripes made him invincible, but his arrogance and prejudice were the very things that made him weak. He tore up a piece of plastic, trying to erase a woman's identity, and in doing so he erased his own future. This story serves as a stark reminder that karma delivered through the quiet professionalism of those we underestimate is often the most devastating force of all. What would you have done in Maya's situation? Have you ever witnessed someone abusing their power and faced the difficult choice of whether to speak up? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. These conversations are important. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories where karma doesn't just knock, it breaks down the door. Thank you for listening.